Before we begin, there is nothing you need to figure out. Not your past, not your future, not even what you're feeling right now. Just allow this moment to be simple. Notice the body as it is. Notice the breath without changing it. And quietly, notice that you are aware. Not doing anything, not trying to reach anywhere. Just here. There is a kind of stillness that appears when nothing is being pushed away. You don't create it. You don't hold it. It is simply what remains. When the mind is not interfering with what is already here. Stay there, just long enough to feel it. Most of the time, we are not resting like this. We are adjusting, improving, trying to make life feel more secure. We organize the outside hoping it will calm the inside, and for a while, it seems to work. Until something shifts. Not a big event, just a small disturbance, a sentence, a memory, a feeling you didn't expect, and the mind begins again. Not because something is wrong, but because it has been trained to continue, to check, to predict, to complete what feels unfinished. As if stillness is something that must be maintained. So even in calm moments, there is a quiet tension underneath. From there, a belief forms very quietly. That peace is something we arrive at, something we earn, something waiting on the other side of effort. So we continue. We refine ourselves. We think more. We try to understand more, but the movement itself never really stops. And if you look closely, the mind is not actually moving toward peace. It is moving away from discomfort, and that movement creates the sense that something is unresolved, because every time we try to escape a feeling, we turn a moment into a problem. And what was passing is now something the mind must carry. So instead of asking how to get rid of this, just notice something simpler. Right now, a feeling can arise. Tightness, restlessness, uncertainty. And at the same time, there is something that sees it, that does not tighten, that does not react. It simply knows, not with words, not with analysis, just a quiet recognition. The feeling moves, the awareness does not move with it. And in that difference, there is already a kind of freedom, not far away, not hidden, just overlooked. When attention stays with the story instead of the seeing. So tonight, we are not going to chase a better state. We are not going to force the mind to be quiet. We are not going to solve anything. We are only going to stay close to what is happening, as it happens, without adding to it, without pushing it away. And as this becomes clearer, you may begin to notice that the space you were searching for was never missing, only unnoticed. Not something to reach, but something you return to, the moment you stop leaving it. Without noticing, we begin to shape our lives around a quiet belief that if everything is arranged well enough, the mind will finally rest. So we organize, we plan, we adjust the outer world until it feels more stable. A clearer schedule, a more secure situation, a version of life that seems easier to hold. And when things align, there is a brief sense of relief, a moment where nothing feels urgent, but it doesn't last. Not because anything failed, but because order outside was never meant to quiet what moves within. You may have felt this. A day that goes smoothly, nothing demanding, nothing obviously wrong. And yet, there is a faint uneasiness, not strong enough to call it anxiety, not clear enough to explain, just a background tension, like something hasn't fully settled. And the more you look, the less it seems connected to what is happening around you. Because the conditions are fine, but the mind is still slightly unsettled, not searching for a solution, but unable to fully rest. So attention turns inward, but not into stillness, into activity, thinking ahead, running through possibilities, trying to stay one step in front of uncertainty, not in big dramatic ways, but in a continuous mental effort. The mind keeps working, as if stopping would be unsafe, and over time, this becomes automatic, a background process that rarely pauses, not because it is needed, but because it has learned to keep going. And this constant activity begins to feel like who we are. Now look a little closer. A moment happens. Simple, direct, a word, a tone, a small shift, and almost instantly, the mind begins to shape it. It interprets, it connects, it extends beyond what actually occurred, not intentionally, but habitually. And what was brief becomes something that lingers, not because the moment was heavy, but because it was carried further than it needed to go. This is where the weight forms, not in the event itself, but in how it is held after it passes. So the question changes, not how do I perfect my life, but something much simpler. What is happening in the mind right now? Not the content, not the story, but the process itself. How experience is received, how it is continued, how it is made to stay. Because the noise is not in what happens, it is in what follows. And when that is seen, even briefly, there is a shift, not in the world, but in the way it is being lived. At some point, after trying to manage the outside and noticing it doesn't bring lasting ease, a different impulse appears, not to control more, but to step away, to find another way to be free. And this is where the path quietly divides, not into right and wrong, but into direction that feel convincing, yet don't resolve what is underneath. Two movements that many people take, not because they misunderstand, but because they are responding to something real, a sincere wish to quiet what does not settle. The first is to become less affected, to reduce what is felt, to remain neutral, no matter what arises. At first, this feels like relief. Less reaction, less disturbance, more distance from what hurts, but slowly, something else fades too. Sensitivity, warmth, the quiet aliveness of experience itself. And without noticing, calmness becomes flat. Not painful, but not fully alive. A state that resembles peace, but is actually a narrowing of experience, where nothing disturbs, but nothing truly opens. The second moves in the opposite direction. Instead of reducing experience, it tries to leave the conditions behind, to step out of complexity, to simplify everything, to believe that distance will bring clarity. So one begins to withdraw from pressure, from responsibility, from situations that feel heavy, and for a while, this creates space, a sense of lightness, but gradually, the same patterns return, because they were never located outside, only expressed there. What was left behind was the environment, not the process that was operating within it. So both paths, in their own way, move away from discomfort. One by reducing experience, the other by avoiding its conditions, but neither looks directly at what is generating it. And without that, the pattern continues. It changes form, it changes context, but it does not end, because the direction remains the same, away from what is felt, instead of into how it is being created. Not because freedom is distant, but because it is being approached from the wrong side. So this brings us to a quieter question, not how to escape, and not how to suppress, but how to remain without being caught in what arises, not outside of life, but fully within it, not removing experience, but no longer being defined by it. And here, it helps to look at someone who lived this directly, not as an idea, not as a retreat, but in the middle of human life. So, what did the Buddha actually do? Let's look at something very simple. Something that may have happened not long ago. Someone says something, a sentence, a tone, not necessarily harsh, but it lands a little deeper than expected. And in that instant, before any thought appears, there is a reaction. A tightening in the chest, a slight heat in the body, a shift that is immediate and undeniable. This part is natural. It happens on its own. There is nothing wrong with it, nothing to fix. Just a moment of contact being registered in the body. But then, almost without pause, something else begins, not in the body, but in the mind. A sentence forms, then another, and another. They don't respect me. This always happens. I shouldn't be treated this way. And what was just a brief moment is now becoming a narrative. Not spoken out loud, but constructed inside, organized, interpreted, linked to past moments, and slowly, it begins to feel more real than the original event, as if what was thought has replaced what actually happened. Now notice what has changed. The original moment was short, just a few seconds, but the narrative does not end there. It continues, revisited throughout the day, replayed in different versions, expanded with elements that were never present, and each time the feeling returns. Not because the event is happening again, but because it is being reconstructed, re-experienced, sustained by attention. The moment ended, but the mind did not let it end. And this is the shift that is often missed. The discomfort did not come from the event itself. It came from what followed, from the way the mind held it, extended it, returned to it. What could have passed on its own was prolonged, not deliberately, but through conditioning. And once prolonged, it becomes a space we remain inside. A reaction becomes a storyline. A moment becomes a state. And the mind treats that state as reality, even though it was built after the fact. So the loss of freedom does not happen when the feeling appears. It happens when the mind continues it, when it builds on it, when it repeats it, when it gives it continuity. And this happens so quickly, it is rarely seen. We believe we are reacting to what happened, but often we are reacting to what the mind constructed afterward. And once that is seen, even briefly, something loosens. Not the situation, but the structure that was holding it in place. So what does freedom actually look like? In a real moment? Not in theory, not in silence, but right there, when something touches you, a word, a look, a situation you didn't expect. The feeling still comes, just as before. The tightening, the reaction. Nothing is removed. Nothing is numbed. Because freedom is not the absence of experience. It is the absence of entanglement. The moment is felt, fully, clearly, but it is not extended beyond itself. The sensation arises, and it is allowed, not analyzed, not resisted, not turned into a conclusion. There is no need to explain it, no need to define what it means, just the raw experience, as it is. And something subtle begins to change, because without the story, the feeling has no structure to build on. It moves, it shifts, it dissolves on its own. Not because you removed it, but because nothing was added to sustain it. This is the difference between feeling and becoming what is felt. In one, the experience passes through awareness. In the other, awareness is pulled into the experience, and the shift is very small, almost invisible. But once seen, it becomes unmistakable. You can feel something deeply, without becoming defined by it, without turning it into identity, without needing to continue it. And in that space, something remains steady, even while everything else is changing. So the practice is not to stop the sting. It is to stop what usually follows, to notice the moment before it becomes something more, before it turns into a chain of thoughts, before it becomes a story about you. And in that brief space, there is freedom, not created, not forced, already present, when the mind does not interfere. And this is why it is so easy to miss, because it does not arrive as something new. It is revealed when nothing extra is added. So when the moment comes, feel it completely, without holding back, without turning away. But don't continue it. Don't build around it. Don't give it a future. Don't write the next chapters. Let it end where it ends and stay with what remains. Not empty, not cold, but quietly alive, unaffected in the deepest sense. And perhaps this is what freedom has always been. Not far away, just overlooked, in the space between feeling and continuing. When people hear about balance, about not being carried by emotions, it is easy to misunderstand. It can sound like distance, like becoming unaffected, like closing down what is felt, as if freedom means no longer caring, no longer being touched by life. But that is not what this points to, because the absence of reaction is not the absence of feeling. One is clarity, the other is disconnection. And they may appear similar, because both are quiet, but one is fully aware, and the other has gone numb. True balance does not remove what is human, it allows it, fully, without distortion. You can feel sadness without collapsing into it. You can feel joy without needing it to continue. You can care deeply without turning care into fear. Nothing is pushed away. Nothing is held on to. And because of that, the heart remains open, responsive, alive, not protected, but no longer needing protection, not pulled apart by every change that passes through it. In the Buddhist tradition, this balance does not stand alone. It is part of a deeper alignment, alongside kindness, compassion, and the quiet joy in others' happiness. Not separate qualities, but different expressions of the same clarity. Because when the mind is no longer entangled, the heart no longer contracts. It does not need to defend itself against experience, so it opens, not selectively, but naturally. And this openness is stable, not because life is stable, but because it is no longer dependent on conditions. There is a moment near the end of the Buddha's life when two of his closest disciples passed away. Those around him felt the absence, the silence they left behind. And when he spoke, he did not deny it. He did not distance himself from the loss. He acknowledged it clearly, simply. And then he continued, not because he was unaffected, but because he was not defined by what he felt. The grief was there, but it did not become something he was lost inside. So equanimity is not a withdrawal. It is not distance. It is not becoming less human. It is becoming undivided, where the heart can feel everything without losing its ground, where love is no longer tied to fear, where care does not turn into suffering. And perhaps this is the quiet strength we are pointing to, not to feel less, but to remain whole, even in the presence of what is deeply felt. There is a teaching, very simple, yet impossible to avoid, that life moves in pairs, not randomly, but in patterns that return again and again. Gain and loss, praise and blame, recognition and being overlooked, pleasure and discomfort. Different forms, different moments, but the same dynamic. They arise, they pass, and no one stands outside of this. Not through effort, not through understanding. These movements are built into the human experience, quietly, continuously. And when they move, something in us responds. When something is gained, there is expansion, a subtle lift. When something is lost, there is contraction, tightness. When we are praised, the mind stores it, returns to it, replays it. And when we are blamed, it resists, defends, reconstructs the moment, not because we choose to, but because the system reacts instantly. So quickly, it feels like identity, and without seeing this, we are carried by each shift, pulled forward, then pulled back, again and again. But there is another way of meeting the same life, not by avoiding these movements, but by seeing their nature, that they do not stay, that they cannot be stabilized, that they do not define what is real. Gain comes, and it passes. Loss comes, and it passes. Praise cannot be held. Blame cannot be held. And when this is seen, not as an idea, but directly, something loosens, not outside, but in the way experience is received. Because what pulls us is not the experience itself, but the assumption that it should stay or should not be there. The leaning toward one side, the resistance to the other, and that leaning creates inner movement, a movement that does not settle. But when both sides, are seen as part of the same process. The pull weakens, not because you suppress it, but because the illusion of control begins to dissolve. Nothing to hold on to, nothing to reject, just experience, seen as changing, as it is. And in that, a different kind of stability begins to appear. Not fixed, not rigid, but grounded, like a mountain, through changing seasons. Spring comes, it does not cling. Winter comes, it does not resist. Rain, sun, wind, all pass through, and the mountain remains. Not untouched, but not displaced at its core. And perhaps this is what it means to be free within life. Not to stop what changes, but to no longer be moved by every change. All of this may feel clear in quiet moments, when you are listening, when nothing is pressing. But life rarely stays that way. There are responsibilities, deadlines, people who need you, conversations that don't unfold as expected, fatigue that gathers through the day. And this is where it matters most. Not in stillness alone, but in the middle of movement. Because freedom is not separate from your life. It is revealed in how experience is met while life is still happening. It may look like something very small, so small it almost disappears. A moment when irritation rises and it is not passed on. A tone that could have sharpened, but softens instead. Not suppressed, not controlled, just not continued. The reaction appears, but it is not completed. And in that gap, the chain breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change what follows. Because what would have become conflict ends as a moment that simply passes. Or a moment when the day feels heavy. Nothing wrong, just a quiet weight in the body. The usual movement is to resist it, to distract, to escape, to override it. But instead, you stay. You feel it as it is, without interpreting it, without adding a story. And slowly, it begins to shift. Not because you changed it, but because you stopped holding it in place. And in that allowing, space appears, even within what once felt closed. At home, this becomes even clearer, because those closest to you touch the deepest patterns. A word is spoken, a tone is heard, and the response is already forming. Familiar, automatic, but this time, there is a pause. Just one breath, just enough to see the reaction before becoming it. And in that moment, a different direction opens. Not because you changed them, but because you didn't continue what was already beginning. These moments are not impressive. They don't look like transformation. No one may notice them, but they matter. Because each time a reaction is not continued, the system softens, inside you and around you. The atmosphere changes, quietly, gradually, and over time. This reshapes more than any single decision. Because freedom is not created in rare moments. It is formed in the smallest ones, again and again. After seeing all of this, a natural question appears. How does this stabilize? Not just understood, but lived. Because in stillness, clarity feels close, but in daily life, it slips. And this is where the teaching becomes precise. Not as philosophy, but as a way of relating to the mind. Different situations call for different responses. Sometimes you step back, sometimes you stay, sometimes you redirect attention. But beneath all of these, there is one principle that comes first. To see, not to control, not to suppress, but to see clearly what is happening. Because without seeing, effort becomes blind, trying to fix what has not been understood. But when something is seen directly, its structure is exposed, and what is seen clearly cannot operate in the same way. This is why the teaching points to something very simple: to abandon by seeing, not by force, but by understanding so clearly that continuation no longer happens. And this seeing depends on something subtle, where attention rests, not what it sees, but how it attends. Because attention can move in two directions, one that tightens, one that opens. When something difficult happens, the mind often turns toward questions that deepen identification. Why me? What does this mean about me? What did I do wrong? These questions feel natural, but they reinforce the story. They anchor the reaction. They keep the experience in motion. There is another way of attending, quieter, closer, not asking for explanation, but observing the process. This is a feeling. This is how it begins. This is how it continues. No judgment, no conclusion, just direct observation, and in that shift, the mind steps out of the narrative. Not by rejecting it, but by no longer participating in it, because attention is what sustains experience. And when attention changes, continuation weakens. So the practice is not to find the right answer. It is to look in the right place, not outward, toward the situation, but inward, toward what is happening in response to it. Not why me, but what is happening right now. And to stay there, gently, without rushing. Because when something is seen clearly, it begins to release. Not through effort, but because it is no longer maintained. After everything we've explored, there is something important to say. This is not about becoming perfect, not about reaching a point where nothing touches you, because that point does not exist. There will still be moments of irritation, of tension, of being carried further than you intended. This does not mean you failed. It means the pattern is still unfolding, and you are becoming aware of it. There will be days when everything feels clear, when the mind is quiet, when reactions fade quickly, and there will be days when the same patterns return. Strong, familiar, convincing. You may think the same thoughts, replay the same moments, and it may feel as if nothing has changed, but something has, even if it is subtle. The difference is not in the pattern, it is in your relationship to it. Because now, there are moments when you see it, not afterward, but during. A thought appears, and it is recognized. A reaction begins, and awareness is present. Even if it continues, it is no longer invisible. And that changes everything, because you are not fully inside it anymore. You are also aware of it, and that shift creates space, not by stopping the pattern, but by no longer being completely identified with it. And this is how the path unfolds, not as progress, but as returning again and again. You see, you forget, you get carried away, and then you notice. And that noticing is the return, not separate from the path. It is the path. Each time you return, the pattern loosens, not because it disappears, but because it is seen sooner and held more lightly. So be gentle with this process, not careless, but patient, like guiding something that is learning to walk, not forcing it, not judging it, just staying close. And over time, without measuring, something softens, not completely, not permanently, but enough to feel the difference. And perhaps this is the most honest form of freedom. Not that nothing arises, but that each time it does, you are less taken by it. It may not feel like progress, not in the way we are used to. There is no straight line, no clear point where everything changes once and for all. Instead, you may notice something quieter. The same situations return, the same feelings arise, the same patterns appear again, and at first, it can feel as if nothing has shifted, as if you are going in circles. But look a little closer, and something is not the same. Not the pattern, but the way it is being seen. You see it a little earlier, not after the reaction, but closer to its beginning. A thought forms, and it is recognized. A feeling rises, and it is noticed before it takes over. And because of that, it does not carry you as far. It does not sustain the same way, not because it is weaker, but because it is no longer unseen. And that clarity shortens the distance between being lost and returning, between identification and awareness. So the path is not about removing what repeats. It is about no longer being formed by what repeats, not stopping the pattern, but not becoming it in the same way. And over time, without needing to measure, something becomes lighter, not because life is easier, but because the mind does not carry each moment forward the same way. And that is a quiet form of freedom, already unfolding. So perhaps freedom was never meant to be something far away, not something waiting at the end of a long journey, not something that appears when life finally becomes the way you want, but something much closer, something that exists within each moment, not in what happens, but in how it is met, in how it is held, in whether it is continued or allowed to end. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it, where nothing needs to be removed, nothing needs to be avoided, and yet something remains untouched, quiet, open, unbound, not because nothing arises, but because nothing is held on to, not distant, not separate, just here, when experience is not extended beyond itself. And maybe you don't need to hold on to any of this, not as an idea, not as something to remember, just this moment, as it is, a breath, a sound, a simple awareness that is already present, and if it is forgotten, that's all right, because it was never something to keep, only something to notice. and it can be found again, not somewhere else, but here, each time attention returns. So for now, there is nothing to reach, nothing to complete, just this breath, this moment, this quiet knowing that does not need to become anything more. Let everything be as it is and rest, not by leaving life, but by no longer moving away from what is already here.